Okay, it looks like we're live.
Okay. Welcome back to the special meeting that we're having here discussing this budget for 2022. So I think we last left off getting clarity on the general fund. And I guess, and maybe for my benefit as much as Molly, that $9 million that is on that line item, correct me if I'm wrong, but mostly that is salary, correct?
Yes, majority of that is salary.
Yeah, okay.
I've got some questions if you want me to go.
Sure.
If we move down to restricted funds, you've got the notation here that the fiscal year 22 budget decreased because we didn't need as much money to reimburse salaries like we did in 21. What was the need? Why did we have to reimburse more in 2021 out of restricted funds? What was driving that?
That was the reduction of the general fund to 8.2 million. We had to increase our reimbursements out of primarily 329, restricted fund 329, to compensate with that reduction in the general fund of salaries.
Okay. As we look at restricted funds then for 2022, what is the assumption that we've made as far as revenues coming in?
So for the revenues coming into those funds, looking at historicals, not looking at fiscal year 21, necessarily looking at prior years, 2018, 19, looking at those historical revenues coming in. Additionally, with Fund 329, with that one in particular, looking at the potential additional revenue for the Lot 23 impacting that. I believe the projected cost was around $140,000. We may be getting reimbursed from Mimi. And there's also additional revenue in there. I didn't think it was that high though, Commissioner Getz, for revenue. So it will be interesting to see what we get out of that fund. And I do want to point out in Fund 326, the flower pot program, which plus the UC green spaces, and other green spaces usually generates about $180,000 annually. That is being reflected in Fund 326 now. And so is our expenditures. So that's going to be an increase in that fund as well.
Okay, so just from big picture. So if you look back historically, like in 2018, we had revenues coming in. And when I say revenues coming in, that's for all the rentals and entries, fees paid, all of that stuff. We were clipping like in 2018, 4.8 million, 2019, 5.4 million. Then obviously in 2020, we had a drop because we've started COVID down to about 4 million. In 2021, the budget was built on back up at the $5.3 million level. Is that what are we assuming that we're going to be at that 5.3 type, 5.4 type, like we used to be?
Yes. Yeah, the assumption is we're going to be back to normal in fiscal year 2022.
Okay. For then 21, since we saw that we are falling well behind budget for revenues, will we have to pay salaries additionally out of our restricted funds because these revenues are so low? How do we make up for that revenue shortfall?
The revenue shortfall was budgeted in fiscal 21. That will be coming out of those fund balances. So you are correct. With the revenue coming in for those funds, it will not cover all the additional salary reimbursements coming out of those funds. So that will be drawing down some of those fund balances by the time we get to the end of the year. The primary fund balances that will draw down from is going to be Riverfront Fund 329, which has a balance right now about 3.9 million. So you could see that balance shrink to about 3.2 million by the end of the year.
So if we look at year over year, we will, I know this is comparing budget to budget, but it's not comparing budget to projected what we're actually going to do for 2021. So I think it's safe to say that our restricted funds are going to be hit fairly significantly by the end of fiscal 21, because we're going to have to make up out of our restricted funds the amount that we fall short on in revenues. And I think we've started seeing that already, because like even with Crone, we have depleted that restricted fund by a third already in this year. So I think we're going to continue to see that. My point is that our budget for next year is at risk, so to speak, when you look at it that way. What are the risks or potential upsides to the budget? We've got a risk, if we don't, starting in July, go back to pre-COVID revenues that we've had before.
I do want to speak in particular to the Crone Fund 332. That is a fund that the salary and expenditures, non-salary expenditures, come directly out of that fund. That fund, we do not reimburse out of that fund. So what you're seeing there is expenditures being drawn from that fund from actual associates in line with that fund, and expenses in line with that fund. The city manager's office is fully aware of that salary, and they know the reserves, especially when we get to May and June. If the butterfly show has any issues, that fund is going to have significant problems in the summer.
Yeah. And that's my point. As we look now at 2022, which we're talking about now, it is based on us getting back to full revenues. And if we don't, then our restricted fund budget is going to be hurt by not having those revenues. When you strip out, if you're looking at purely operating budget, when you forget about, because when you mix in capital budget, it gets all crazy, obviously. But this shows year over year that we actually are increasing our operating budget for the year, even after an 8% reduction from prior year. Am I looking at that correctly? Because if you look
at correct, when you look at us compared to fiscal year 21, we have an increase in the fiscal year 2022.
Even after our 8% reduction.
Yes.
Okay. I'm trying to get my head around.
And then fiscal year, I do want to point out fiscal year, when we look at 2020, I'll need to go pull that budget. I believe the budget for the general fund in 2020 was around 8.8 million.
We spent, what we're comparing to for 2020, the actual for 2020 was almost exactly $20 million. Forget about, I get hung up. I don't look at just budget versus budget. It's like in 2020, we actually spent to operate the parks, $20 million, almost exactly, 19,995. So that's $20 million. So now we're looking at a budget for 22. After the 8% reduction, we are up to $21.33 million. So we're up compared to actual of 2020. So that's what I'm trying to get my head around, that even though we're looking at 8% potential decreases, our operating budget is actually going up.
And I do want to point out fiscal year 2020, that was impacted by the pandemic as well. Furloughs occurred in the middle of March and in April, where we furloughed associates, and we hired 0 part-time associates from March all the way to June, and then going into the rest of the summer months into fiscal 21. So that would have a significant impact in that 2020 expenditures, not only with salaries, but also expenses, because if we're not hiring 80 plus part-time associates, we're not also expending on horticultural supplies or other expenses.
That's a very good point, Craig. I get you. But if you go back, the budget that we're looking at today for 2022 is higher than what we spent in 19, 18, or 17. So I just want the narrative to be correct. And what it's saying to me is we're getting more money. I don't see that we're, even with an 8% reduction. It just an observation that I think is interesting. What's that?
I was just gonna, is it fair to say that not only getting more money, but using more money? So for example, the urban forestry assessment is, adding $200,000 into their budget. That was funding that is available to use. So Craig, at least that's a component of it, is identification of additional resources to use.
Yes, and part of that is, like Kara did say, the urban forestry assessment is a good one to point out. Right, there's a $200,000 impact where they did not have that funding in prior years. And also going through this budget and going through the needs assessment with the organization, this is where they're kind of looking at, in years past, especially with the city budget and the restricted funds, items were budgeted into object codes such as parts, building repairs, or other object codes that really were off limits to associates to utilize because they didn't necessarily know what they were for. And going through the needs assessment and really reallocating those dollars then into other areas such as supplies, horticultural supplies, and equipment, that's going to free the operations up to know that they do have budgeted dollars within certain object codes, and they're not necessarily afraid to use that money now versus in prior years where they wouldn't utilize the money because they didn't know what it was for necessarily.
Maybe another way for me to help visualize this, what is the planned, what is the head count going to be in the what does the head count reflect for this 2022 budget that we've got?
I do not have that figure.
I can provide that here shortly. Let me.
Yeah, good deal.
One thing I think is worthwhile, Craig and Kara, you and I discussed this at some point, is tracking head count in a way that the board can understand it. So we can look at our head count, by areas that you really pay attention to and focus on operationally, and then look at open positions, because they're directly tied to our ability to achieve the mission of the parks. I think that'll be really relevant to us, and that, as President Lindner stated, that's where we're spending all the money on people.
Happy to hear that, because part of our exercise was getting people bucketed in the right locations, and this way we knew where they actually do report to, because we had a lot of associates bucketed in the incorrect location. When I say location, I mean sitting in like the East District, East Region, but they were reporting to the West Region. So part of that needs assessment exercise was not only that, but personnel assessment to see where do these not only full-time positions belong, where do these part-time positions belong. And we do have a pretty good report out there that we do look at interactive and look at active positions and then open positions, and it does identify where those individuals are located. It historically has been inaccurate because we would have people or associates in the incorrect location, but it is going to be accurate probably starting this next month.
And will there be a report that you guys can share with us so that we can get a sense of, how many folks are working in the east versus the west versus central or what have you, as well as the open positions would be beneficial.
Yes, that can be provided.
Great.
And also, if you guys ever want to look at payroll, work lost time, non-work lost time, happy to provide that too. So looking at the year one position summary, all looks like there is a FTE count of 231.2.
Okay. So I have a question. It's rather mundane compared to some of these other really good questions, but I'm looking at 2 facility maintenance specialists at 148,000 and a laborer at 75,000. So I look at that and I'm thinking a laborer makes more money than a facility maintenance specialist. Is that an accurate statement?
That's something that we will need to. So within the city system, the CBS system, we input a job code.
Okay.
And the job code automatically calculates the salary. So that's one thing. Since this is a prelim budget, we have not gone through.
Gotcha. Fair enough.
The next steps of identifying what makes sense and what doesn't make sense.
So this isn't necessarily reality. This is just, call it the first phase through the city process.
Yes, and where we identify inconsistencies, and that would be one inconsistency, but that inconsistency could be from depending on the hiring date. So
Sure.
If I push the hiring date out 6 months, but the laborer I only push out 3 months, that could have an impact.
Gotcha. Okay, so this doesn't necessarily represent an annual salary or anything like that. This is just a budgetary impact. And along that, I understand the labor currently we're having a part-time labor, but it's going to go to full-time. Is that?
That is the request, yes.
That's the request. So I just want to make sure that the net difference is reflected, because we're obviously paying a part-time person part-time of the year. And so hopefully you'll just include the net increase over the current.
Yes, President Lerner, what will you do in that situation is remove that job code or that position, then add the code for the full-time.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
So perhaps, go ahead, Linda.
Oh, thank you, Jim. Just a quick one on just how you were thinking about increases in revenue. As an example, on the gift shop sales, $100,000 more than the previous year, and the reduction in the previous year was due to the pandemic. So did you use a percentage in terms of trying to project what that might be going forward? And is that the same across the board?
So for the gift shop revenue, that's a little bit unique because the Butterfly Show is running through July and August next year. And then the Butterfly Show will also be running, if it runs on normal schedule, March through June. So that's what's impacting the Crone, is the Butterfly Show really operating 2 additional months. And that will help increase the sales there. Additionally, I know we are looking at ways to go online shopping for Crone as well. So we can go ahead and allow individuals to purchase stuff online, and then we would ship the products to them, which we've identified that is very successful with the selling of flowers through Crone.
Okay, because that just looked a little aggressive to me, given the 8% reduction that number reflects. So
you're in good hands with Mark over there at Crone. He has a lot of great ideas, and we're supportive of it. And I do think with really his leadership over there, and Kara's and Jenny, that you're gonna see some nice things occur out of Crone.
Great.
Yeah, if my memory serves correct, just with the flower sort of pilot project, they reached their goal of 25,000 in revenue. And so the idea would be to continue doing that and expand it to include other gift shop items that are popular in addition to flowers.
Craig, perhaps what you can do for us for the next meeting is give us that headcount information so that we've got where we are today as far as actual employees and how many open positions that we have within the budget. And then show us what that looks like for this budget that we have in front of us for 2022, how that compares, just so we can see, apples to apples as far as actual FTEs. The only other comment, a couple other, the quick comment would be, we need to think through format, only because this attachment A that we have is great information, but it's a different format than what we've seen before. It's a different format from the monthly budget versus actual reports that we get. And it's also different from the budget presentation that the city does. So as somebody that's a geek and sort of like tries to tie out one to the other, it's a little difficult. So perhaps thinking forward as we're looking at reporting and that sort of thing, if we could come up with a format that's easy to, on a monthly basis, compare this budget that we're looking at with what the city has approved and how we're reporting on every month against it, I think would be good. The only other thing is, as it relates to the Commissioners Fund, number one, as far, I would like to say that we should revisit the Commissioners Fund once we've had the final recommendation from the city, what the city is doing, because right now we're looking at full 8% reduction. Maybe that won't come into be. Plus, with the distribution from our investment funds, you've built in here, I see a 5% draw from our investment funds. I think we need to look at the whole Commissioners Fund, and you all saw the email I sent before about potential funds being available. I think we need to spend some time, and I don't know if it'll be ready in the next couple weeks, but maybe at our March meeting, we could think a little bit more about the Commissioners Fund, because I think we've got some opportunities there for spending and availability of funds. So that was a long-winded way of saying, this is fine if we're looking at this as a placeholder, but I think we need to, before it's finalized, think a little bit more critically of the Commissioners Fund.
Okay, I would just add that I agree with you. It was going to be the one thing that I brought up. I'm questioning taking 5% from all the trusts and endowments, and unless it's going to be actually used. And I know by law, we have, in certain of these endowments, we must take 5%, but if we don't have to, I really would prefer we don't unless we're going to use it.
Yeah, and commissioners, part of this exercise was looking at that and looking at from an expenditure standpoint through the needs assessment, and also looking at, and obviously I agree with that. We can hold off on the distribution one. I mean, we have a trust attorney hired going through each of the funds and providing information. This is just like a placeholder placed on it, exactly what it was. And I do want to point out it is something that, as we look at the market today, I think it would be good for us to revisit this, especially from a distribution standpoint sooner, knowing that it seems like the market value on the equities are pretty inflated at this point. So it may be something that we want to address a distribution amount and of a higher percent, knowing that are those market values going to come back down to potential reality.
All right. Any other questions for Craig and or Kara?
you have provided a great amount of feedback. I appreciate this discussion. This was, it was really important to us to make sure that we had an opportunity to speak with you before we brought you the final recommended budget. So I do appreciate the critiques, the comments, and we will answer to those at our March meeting for you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks. So moving on then to the last real item on our agenda is the director's annual evaluation. And I would just share with the listeners and viewers here kind of our process. We met as a group of commissioners and kind of by ourselves with the addition of Kevin from law to keep us in line. And we had, I think, very good, robust conversations regarding Kara's performance, particularly in light of a year from hell, and talked about goals and objectives that had been set forth for her and where she landed against some of those, as well as just her overall performance. Then later on, we had a discussion with Kara involved in that. And so we shared some of those thoughts and comments, and also spoke to some, call it future goals, objectives, maybe some tweaking here and there, and the settling in prospect or aspect of her new role, or relative at that point, it was quite new. Kara, you've been the director now since what, about early January of 2000, correct?
Officially, yes.
Officially, yes. Right. Interim for what, about 3 or 4 months prior to that.
Yes,
So, you know, a lot of things have transpired, you know, in that what is a relatively brief period of time. So I think hopefully we all feel we've done our due diligence. So and I think have provided some good feedback, as well as continuing to kind of flesh out some objectives and opportunities. We're still in the process of that, but I would just open it up to the rest of the commissioners for any other comments or anything like that, and then to maybe have a recommendation for a salary increase. So would anybody else like to chime in? Okay. Well, we did have a 2-hour conversation before, so maybe we've done all our chiming in that's necessary. So,
Brad?
Yeah.
I think it's probably, I mean, given how much time we have contributed to this in our executive session, I think it's probably worthwhile just to provide some highlights so that we create some transparency between the commissioners and with Kara as well, and really to go on record.
Sure.
By saying, you know, I certainly won't speak to last year because I wasn't a commissioner, but just to kind of coalesce around some opportunities, I think, for us as a commission and Kara to work on. And really our expectation that she really provides some leadership to us as a commission in a way, and also to the parks in terms of really prioritizing a strong relationship with the Parks Foundation. We're all very committed to that very important relationship as we share a mission of serving the parks well. You know, also we talked a lot about Kara really establishing a lot of credibility with her colleagues at City Hall, both with council and with City Hall staff. We also talked about, you know, Kara being a newer executive, managing an organization of this scale and all the complexities that come with managing a team, the various stakeholders, the highly political environment in which she operates, and the opportunity that an executive coach can be really helpful. And I can speak on from personal experience that an executive coach is time well spent. No matter how good we are at what we do, we can always be better. So we've positioned that as an opportunity for Kara, and something that we've agreed as a park board that we will support in this year's budget. We've also talked a lot in these meetings about really enhancing the board report so we can spend kind of less time digging into the details and getting more strategic as a board. And to that note, I've also offered, and we've offered to Kara, that we need to put some effort around doing a shorter term plan in terms of year, but also looking beyond that into something that maybe 3 or 5 years. So in the coming months, we've asked Kara to really start to position the parks to something that really achieves some bigger stuff long term and makes some real transformational change that can support our parks and our residents. And I think that mostly sums it up. Obviously, there was a lot of discussion in our executive session that really got to us positioning those as things that we'd like for Kara to focus on in the next 6 months, and then an opportunity for us to convene again together and talk about something a little more long term.
Thank you, Molly. That's a good summation. The only thing, that I would add is I believe that we talked about making sure that focusing on a succession plan, that, we need to, you just have to plan for that. You just have to, I mean, that's just good business practice, is to find out whatever, may happen, that you do have some backup plan for all positions. So I think that's another element that was an important objective of hers this coming year.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Linda.
Thank you both for those comments. Molly, thank you for summarizing what I think was a very robust discussion that we had, and hopefully very helpful to our director, because I think to the extent that we can all make sure we're on the same page around expectations and measures, it's going to be better for everyone. And so Molly, I think you spoke, and Brad, very specifically to going forward. I just wanted to take the opportunity to look back and acknowledge part of our conversation was commending our director on the stellar job that she did in the face of the pandemic, and how important it was that we were able to have our parks open and available to the public as a place that they could go in the very challenging season that we were facing. So I want to make sure we acknowledge what a significant contribution that was to our city. And I'm just really pleased that we were able to do that and do that safely.
Thank you, Linda. Well said. Anybody else?
I would just echo what Linda said, and the summary that both of you provided. I think it's a good recap of our discussion. I'm excited about moving forward and the objectives that we've set moving forward. I think one of the things that we have to do is also recognize, and unfortunately, we as a board have to officially weigh in on a salary increase. So I think we want to reflect the work that was done last year, and as Linda said, the incredible way that we maneuvered through a crisis situation that hopefully we don't have to repeat anytime soon. But in recognition for the ability to lead and the accomplishments and in recognition of the things that we've laid out as far as opportunities and goals that we've established for the next several months, I feel comfortable recommending that we provide a 1% retroactive increase to the beginning of January for CARA for this year. And I guess I'll put that in the form of a motion since we've got to approve it.
Yes, thank you. Do we have a second? Or any discussion?
I'll second.
All right, Mary?
President Lemner,
Yes.
Vice President Getz,
Yes.
Commissioner Castellini,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas,
Yes.
Commissioner North.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you all.
President-
Yeah,
May I just say a huge thank you to all of the commissioners. I'm appreciative of all of the time and energy that you've put into having discussions with and without me, and I'm just very grateful. I do agree that there was a lot of great feedback. Continue to absorb it all, work through it all, and my intention will be in a very short period of time to give you kind of a roadmap of how I think we can accomplish those items.
great, thank you. And I would just like to say that thank you to the rest of the commissioners. I think one, that every one of them has, call it communicated a strong support for you and a really strong willingness also to help wherever is possible. And I guess I would also say that I very much appreciate everybody's input, and I enjoy going through, as difficult as this may seem to believe, I do enjoy the process of going through this and getting to what I think is good, sound decisions, and not just focused on this particular decision, but everybody really has a very strong offering and contribution in these discussions, and I think we do a good job as a team, and I want to thank you all for your willingness to step up and chime in and share your opinions and thoughts, and they are a lot better than mine would be acting solo. So as they say, two heads are better than one, and five is better than two. So sometimes we kind of discover our way through this process, just as you discovered your way through this process of pandemic. But we come out the other end, I think, in a pretty good spot. So Kara, thank you, and
Thank
the rest
you.
of the commissioners, thank you for helping steer me and making me look as good as I potentially can look, despite myself. So with that, our next meeting is scheduled for the 18th, and we hope to see or hear. And I don't know if we'll be virtual, if we'll be live, or a combination. Susie, you'll still probably be out in Arizona at that.
I will.
that
I will
point.
still
So,
be.
be thinking of us while you're out there enjoying that warm weather.
It's awesome.
Yeah, thanks. Don't rub it in. Anything else for the good of the order today? Okay, well, how about we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right. Thank you, everybody.